Hey guys, and happy May! I cannot believe it's already May. I hope you all had a great April. Today I'm going to be sharing my April palette roundup. So these are all of the palettes that I used in April. This year I am keeping track of every palette that I use. I'm keeping that all logged in a spreadsheet so that at the end of the year I can look back and see what were my most used palettes, which palettes did I not use. There are still some palettes that I haven't used yet this year in my collection, so it's really good information to have, especially as I'm getting ready to do some decluttering. I like to do a big declutter in like late spring, early summer. So I will be doing a big palette declutter coming up probably in June, but it's been really interesting to see which palettes I've been using this year. So in April, I used 15 of my eyeshadow palettes. Now for reference, I do currently own 47 palettes, and that does include quads and like smaller palettes. So that means I used about a third of my palette collection in April, which is not too bad. My most used palette was actually a tie. There were 3 palettes that I used 3 times in April, and that's the most times I used any of my palettes. So 2 of those were from the new Ace Beauté floral collection. I have been loving these palettes. These just launched like last week at the end of April, but I did receive these in PR and I did get them in like the earlier half of April, so I had quite a bit of time before then to try them out. And so these 2 right here, the Cala and Flora palettes, were the 2 that I used 3 times in April. I would say my favorite palette of the collection is the Flora palette. I just love this warm yellow and red color story. I really don't have anything else like this in my collection, and it's got some really unique shades in it. I love yellow eyeshadow, and it's hard to find good yellow palettes, and I love that this one isn't just only yellows, it also has some warm like reds and oranges in it. I used this in a recent testing new makeup video if you want to see one of the looks that I created with this month. I'm loving the shimmers in here. I love Ace Beauté's shimmer formula specifically. I think they do shimmers so well. Their mattes are good too. I would say what I've figured out about their mattes is that you really want to treat them like pressed pigments. I'm not sure if they technically are pressed pigments, but especially the deeper shades, some of those, you kind of want to pack them on and then just lightly blend out the edges. If you go over them with a blending brush too much, they will kind of blend away, which I think is just how pressed pigments tend to be. So that's how I figured out the best way to use their mattes. But even though I had a little bit of trouble with some of those deeper mattes, I still loved the final result that I got with this. And also, each of the palettes in this collection has real dried flowers inside. Such a cool detail. I don't think I've ever seen another brand do anything like that. That was Flora. I would say that was my favorite palette of the month if I were ranking these. The other one that I used 3 times from the floral collection was the Cala palette. I would say I like this one almost as much as Flora. This one is just a more neutral color story, but look at those 4 shimmers in there. They are so incredibly foiled. I mean, these, I would say, like, if I'm comparing this to other cool neutral palettes in my collection, the first one that comes to mind would be like my ABH Sultry palette. I mean, that one's not fully cool toned, and neither is this one, but if I'm comparing it to palettes with a similar vibe, I think this is better quality than Sultry for sure. Particularly those shimmers. I mean, those are like the most twinkly, wet-looking shimmers. They're gorgeous. I also love the 4 mattes they included in here. You get a more like camel-colored medium brown, a more rosy mid-tone, and then a brown and a black. So you have, I feel like, just all the neutral mattes that you would need, and then 4 beautiful shimmers to choose from. And you can go really smoky with this one, with this shimmer here. That's that deepest, like, taupey brown shimmer. It even has a little bit of purple to it. So if you wanted to do like a really smoky look for a night out, I think this would be a perfect palette for that. And each of these palettes retails for $20 a piece, which I think is not bad at all for the quality and also just the beautiful packaging. The third palette that I used 3 times, this one hardly counts as 3 uses, but this is the e.l.f. Bite Size Quad in Cream and Sugar. The times that I used this, I really was only using this light matte shade here, this light cream color, just because I needed something to set my eyeshadow primer, so I just had this nearby and used it. So it's not like I was really creating a look centered around this palette, but I did dip into it at least a handful of times. Actually, the first time this year that I reached into this palette was in April. Next, I also have a handful of palettes that I used twice in April, and one of them was this third palette from that Ace Beauté floral collection, the Begonia palette. There are 4 palettes in the collection. The only one I didn't end up keeping was the purple one, but the Begonia palette is also really pretty, a really fun color story for spring. So this one I used twice. One time I did a look just using this, and I don't think I took a picture of that one, unfortunately, but it was like a purple and green look. I used this green shimmer on the lid, which is another beautiful duochrome, and I think I used just this light purple and this deep shade to deepen up the look. And then the other time I used this, I used it in conjunction with the Cala palette, I think I only really used these two shades. The light shimmer, that's the shade I used in my inner corner, and then this shade I put a little bit of that in the crease just to add a little bit of a rosy mauve to the crease, but that look mainly featured the Cala palette. So really like this color story. I think this is my favorite just packaging wise because I love this color so much, this rich, like almost maroon red. So pretty. But I didn't get a chance to use all the shades in here yet, so I would love to use this more in May. Another palette I used twice in April was my ABH Norvina palette, and both times I used this, I actually did a very similar look twice, and one of them was more just like a practice round. I wasn't like filming or anything, but I was just putting a bunch of eyeshadows all over my eyes, and it was mainly a periwinkle look where I also used my Lethal Custom palette, but both of the times I did that look, I used a little bit of Soul here, this nice dusty periwinkle. That's one of the shades I don't use very often in this palette, but it is a really fun shade, especially paired with like lighter periwinkles and like light blue tones. Really, really fun look. And I think that's really the only shade I used from this palette in April, but I'm glad to have gotten some more use out of that shade. It is starting to show a slight dip. Yeah, that made me want to use that shade a lot more. So speaking of my Lethal Custom 12 pan, I did use this one twice in April as well, and it was actually the same two looks where I used the Norvina palette. And in those looks, I pretty much just used the entire top row of this palette. That is I would say that's my favorite row of the palette just because it does have my two multichromes in it. Those shades are Parsec and Genesis. And in April, I learned that those two shades layered together look so beautiful. So the thing I like about the Lethal Multichromes is that they're kind of translucent. So first I laid down Genesis, which is this blue and pink and green duochrome, but then I added some of Parsec on top. That shade is more of like a pink, gold, and mint green multichrome. So because it has pink to it, it kind of cooled down the Genesis shade a little bit. That Genesis shade has a lot of like an aqua blue undertone, and sometimes I don't want it to be too aqua-y. I don't always love that type of shade on my eyes. So adding that other shade on top made it like the perfect, just ethereal unicorn looking shade. Like it looks like the color of like a Lisa Frank unicorn. I just think that is so pretty. So I'm glad I tried that. If you have any Lethal Multichromes, try layering them together if you have two colors that look like they would mix well together, because you can create like a whole new fun shade. I love that so much. So those are the shades I had all over my lid in those looks, and then I used quite a bit of Altitude, this light periwinkle shade, in my crease. And I think I did also use this mint green here. I think that's called something to do with, oh, Celestial. I knew it had something to do with outer space. That I had in my inner corner. So always love this palette. I think that top row is so fun for spring. I really need to do a look with the yellow and green soon though. I think that'll make a fun spring look also. I can't believe we really only have one more month of spring. Because like once it's June, I think of that as like full-on summer. So the months are flying this year. So now we're into the palettes that I used only one time in April, and these are really the bulk of the palettes in this video. The first one was my Anastasia Soft Glam palette. This one I used in my video doing a full face of all my oldest products. This is my oldest palette. So I'll link that video for you if you want to see that look. It was really fun because I also used two different blue eyeliners on my lower lash line because those were two of my other oldest products. And so the look ended up kind of funky. I don't know. I didn't love it so much as I was doing the look, but then when I looked back at the video as I was editing it, I was like, I guess that doesn't look too bad. I kind of like it. I'm not used to seeing so much blue on my lower lash line. But anyway, that was a really fun look. I mostly just used these three shades here. I used Rustic in the crease, Cypress Umber in the outer corner, and then a bit of bronze on the lid. But the main lid shade I used was actually my Makeup Geek Single in Grandstand. And I also used Fairy in my inner corner. So that's that palette. I always enjoy using this palette. It's still a great palette, and I still feel like the shadows are performing well, even though I've had this for 5 years. So far, the shades have held up really well. Another couple of Ace Beauté shadows that I used in April, I finally got around to using the Aura palette again. This one I really like. I think this is such a beautiful spring color story. Actually kind of similar to the Begonia that I was just showing from them. Similar just with the pink and green and purple tones, but the Begonia palette I would say is just a little bit more muted than the Aura. This one has a lot of like really bold purples in it too. I think I was wearing this in my Project Pan video at the beginning of April, but I am really proud of myself because I finally dipped into the chartreuse shades down here. I finally used the shade Hazy. I was worried that that was going to look weird on my skin tone, but I felt like it actually turned out really pretty. So I used Hazy in the crease, and then I used this deeper, like olivey brown shade called Nimbus in the outer corner. Then I put Sunburst in the center of my lid, and then I faded that into the shade Halo here, which is a light purple shimmer. Normally I wouldn't put a green and a purple next to each other, but the nice thing about that Halo shade is that it has almost like a green gold shift. So it worked really well actually next to that green shade. That was a very out of my comfort zone look, and I did like a bright pink lip. I think I was wearing my Urban Decay lipstick in Art Walk with that, and it just ended up being a really nice, bright, fun spring look. And once again, the shimmers in this palette just, they blow me away every time. So that was that. I'm glad I got another use out of that. And then I also apparently used my Floral Vintage palette again in April, but I don't remember using this. I'm guessing I may have just dipped into this for like one or two shades. I might have just dipped into it for the black shade here because I've done that before where I just use like a matte black to draw like a wing on my upper lash line. I'm guessing that's what I did with this because I don't think I did like a full-blown look with it, but I did use that once in April. I also used my BH Cosmetics Lost in Los Angeles palette. This is it depotted here in my magnetic palette. This I used in my everyday makeup drawer Get Ready With Me at the beginning of April, and I'll link any videos that I'm referencing will be linked below, just so you know. And I mainly used this column here, these peachy shades, and then I did like a pop of blue in the inner corner. That was really fun too. I've been having a lot of fun with color lately. That's really the main takeaway here. I think usually when we get to this time of year in the spring, I start playing with a lot more color, and I've been having so much fun. Another palette that I used just once in April was the e.l.f. Earth and Ocean palette. This I think I just used at the very beginning of April, and I don't think I got a picture of that look. I used a bunch of the blues. I just did like a very monochrome blue look with like Oasis and Abyss, and then I did like a mix of Siren and Saltwater, these two blue shimmers on the lid. So that's always a fun one. I feel like I'm starting to see some nice, you know, small dips in some of these shades, and I do plan to put this in my project pan at some point this year and try to hit pan on one shade because I think I could do it. Yeah, I've had this one a while. I also used, finally, actually for the first time this year, this is one of my favorite palettes, but for some reason I haven't used it much this year yet. It's still one of my favorite palettes, though, don't get me wrong. I think I've just been busy reaching for other things, but this is the Flower Desert Lights palette. I think the only shade I used was this shade Mirage. It's a light pink shimmer, and that is the shade I used in my inner corner in the really like sparkly periwinkle look that I did. I think I just wanted to use this palette in some capacity, but I love these shades. I think I'm gonna make sure I put this palette in my summer palette basket. When I switch out my palette basket for the summer, this is definitely gonna go in there because I think something about Desert Lights, the name Desert Lights makes me think of summer. Definitely gonna make a point to use this a lot in the summer. I also used my Clarity So Mermazing palette one time. This is also the palette that I'm wearing today. I've been in the mood to reach for this palette recently, like the past week. This is like all I want to use. Have just been in a very pastel mood, and I love the shimmers in here. Like, the shimmers are what make this palette so special to me. And the day I used this, that was actually in my Get Ready With Me that I did for my patrons and members. I did like a Get Ready With Me Q&A, and this is the palette that I used in that video. And I'm proud of myself, I even did a little, I guess you would call it graphic liner. I mean, it's like a very small graphic liner kind of in this inner part of my crease with this matte green shade. And that was a really fun look. I always have fun when I use this palette. Today I've got on the blue and green in my crease, and then a little bit of the pink in my inner crease, you can see, the yellow in my inner corner, and then on the lid I have this shimmer. I just feel like there are endless possibilities with this palette, and I love it this time of year. Speaking of mermaids, I also used the Sea Talk palette from Odin's Eye once this month. I think I might have only used these two shades. In that look, the shade I had all over my lid was my Clarity Single in Capri Sun. That's this one that's in my everyday makeup drawer right now. But I also took that day to try out, finally, this shade Electric Kelp, this like yellow-green neon. I put that in my inner corner, really fun shade. And then I topped a little bit of like the inner part of my lid with the shade Mermaid Scale, this minty color. Yeah, I've been loving this palette this year as well. I think this, actually, it would be fun to do a look with both this and So amazing. Yeah, those would make a fun pairing. And I like that the Sea Talk palette has some deeper mattes in it too to go along with this. I might have to try that in May. Yeah, those look like great companions. And the last palette I used once in April was the Sigma New Mod palette. This one also, I can't remember what I did with this or when I used it, what look I did. It may have been just, I may have just dipped into it for one or two shades, but I don't think I did like a full-blown look featuring this. I think I may have just dipped into like the cream shade and maybe like the brown or something. Yeah, I'm not sure, but I definitely did at least use this once in April. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how this series continues to evolve throughout the year. I'll be back with another update on this series at the beginning of June. Thank you all so much for watching. If you want to catch up on previous palette roundup videos from this year, I'll link the playlist below. But thank you all so much for hanging out today. I hope you had fun. If you did, be sure to give the video a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I do also have a Patreon and a channel membership if you would like to support my channel further. Otherwise, I hope you all have an amazing rest of your day, and I will talk to you again very soon in my next video. Bye!